The wooden floor creaked as the alien woman pushed the door open with trembling fingers. Her body shook from cold, her clothes torn and thin, hardly enough to keep out the night air. Hunger gnawed at her belly like a beast that refused to let go. She had not eaten in 2 days, not since she found the last dry roots buried in the dirt. Her hands clutched her ribs, feeling how sharp they had become. She stepped inside, her breath fogging in the human's kitchen. The room smelled of bread, heavy and warm, a smell that almost made her collapse. Her eyes darted quickly across the room. She saw wooden shelves lined with jars, strange bottles filled with red and yellow liquid, and a loaf of bread sitting on the table. Her throat tightened. Just one piece would be enough to keep her alive a little longer. She moved with quick, nervous steps, her long ears twitching at every sound. Shadows loomed large on the walls as the fire from the stove cast its faint glow. She bent low, almost crawling, her bare feet leaving faint marks on the floor. Her heart pounded as she stretched her hand toward the bread. The crust was golden, still soft. She tore a small piece off and stuffed it into her mouth. Tears filled her eyes at the taste, salty from her own lips. She wanted to eat it all, but fear held her back. If the human returned, he would surely kill her. Or worse, call soldiers. Her people had told her humans were merciless, that they hated her kind. Yet here she was, standing in the enemy's house, stealing food like a cornered animal. She moved toward the stove next. The pot on top let out faint steam. She lifted the lid slowly, and a wave of heat hit her face. Soup. The smell was rich, full of herbs and something she could not name. Her stomach growled so loudly she froze, clutching her chest as if the noise could betray her. She looked over her shoulder. The house was silent. No footsteps, no voices. Only the ticking of a clock on the wall. She dipped the ladle into the soup with shaking hands and sipped. It burned her tongue, but she did not care. She drank again, greedily, the warmth spreading through her thin body. For the first time in weeks, the cold inside her bones eased. She leaned against the counter, her knees weak. Her mind swam with memories of her husband, his smile, his voice, the way he promised he would return from the war. But he had not. The war had taken him, leaving her alone, a widow with nothing but hunger and grief. She closed her eyes, clutching the ladle like a lifeline. If he could see her now, stealing from a human's kitchen, he would not recognize her. The proud woman she had been was gone. Only a starving shadow remained. The silence broke. A soft click echoed behind her. Her head snapped around. The door to the kitchen was half open. A tall figure stood there, dark against the light from the hallway. A man. Human. His hand still rested on the switch he had just turned. The light above the table flickered and then glowed, flooding the room. She froze. Her chest tight, her throat dry. The ladle slipped from her hand and clattered back into the pot. His eyes locked on hers. They were not cruel, not angry, only steady, watching. She could not move. Her legs screamed to run, but her body felt nailed to the floor. Her breath came quick, shallow. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a slow push. Each sound of his boots on the wooden floor felt like thunder in her ears. He stopped near the table, only a few feet from her. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her tongue felt heavy. She reached for the bread still clutched in her hand, as if to drop it, to show she would leave, that she meant no harm. But she could not unclench her fingers. The bread was her life. Without it, she would die. She pressed her back to the wall, her eyes wide, waiting for him to shout, to strike, to call others. Instead, he only looked at her, his face calm, unreadable. His gaze slid to the pot on the stove, then back to her. The silence grew unbearable. She wanted to scream, to beg, to vanish. She thought of her child, long gone from hunger, and shame crushed her chest. She lowered her head, her body shaking. If he killed her now, perhaps it was what she deserved. She had nothing left anyway. Her breaths came out as sobs she could not control. The bread in her hand crumbled, falling piece by piece to the floor. The man did not move for a long moment. His hand finally shifted, not toward her, but toward the chair at the table. He pulled it back slowly and sat down. His eyes never left her. She waited for words, for judgment, but none came. Only the sound of the clock ticking and her own ragged breathing filled the air. He leaned back in the chair, arms resting on the table, his face still calm, almost thoughtful. Her body sagged against the wall. She wanted to ask why he was not shouting, why he had not already dragged her outside. but her voice was gone. She slid down, her legs folding, until she sat on the floor, hugging herself. Her eyes stayed locked on him, watching, fearing every twitch of his muscles. She could not understand. He should hate her. He should have thrown her out already. Yet here he sat, silent, watching, as if waiting for something. The breadcrumbs scattered around her feet, the soup still steaming in the pot, the fire crackling faintly. The night had changed, and she knew nothing would ever be the same again. The air between them was heavy, so heavy she felt every breath burn her throat. The man did not move quickly, nor did he raise his voice. He only watched her with steady eyes, as if weighing something deep inside. She pressed herself tighter against the wall, the corner of the kitchen trapping her. Her hands shook, her body weak, but her eyes stayed locked on his, waiting for the strike that never came. He leaned forward slowly, his chair creaking under his weight. For a moment, she thought he would finally call soldiers or reach for a weapon. Instead, he placed both hands on the table, calm and steady, and reached for the loaf of bread she had tried to steal. Her breath caught. She wanted to beg, to explain, but no sound came. Her heart thumped like a drum in her ears. He tore the loaf in half, the sound sharp in the silent kitchen. Steam rose from the soft center, filling the room with its smell. He set one half back on the table and placed the other closer to the edge, nearer to her. He did not speak. He did not push it all the way to her hands. He simply left it there, waiting, his eyes still on her face. It was an invitation, or a test. She could not tell. Her stomach roared with hunger. She stared at the bread, her body trembling with need, but suspicion knotted her chest. Could this be a trick? Maybe he wanted her to step forward, to lower her guard, and then he would trap her. Her people had told her humans were clever, dangerous. Her lips parted, but she stayed frozen, her back pressed so hard against the wall that the wood cut into her skin. The man did not press her. He sat back again, his face unreadable, as if he had all the time in the world. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, her hunger broke her fear. With shaky steps, she moved closer, her eyes never leaving his face. Her hands reached out, quick and cautious, grabbing the bread like a thief. She tore into it, chewing fast, her eyes watering at the taste. The soft warmth filled her mouth, filling her belly with life. She ate like someone who had been starving for days because she had. Her body shook with each bite, half from fear, half from relief. The man said nothing. He only watched, his face calm, not angry, not disgusted, only studying. When she finished the bread, crumbs stuck to her lips and chin. She wiped them with the back of her hand, ashamed. But the man did not laugh. He stood suddenly, and she flinched, dropping the last piece to the floor. Her heart nearly stopped as he walked toward the stove. She expected him to take the pot away, to close the lid, to end this mercy. Instead, he lifted the pot with both hands, carried it to the table, and set it down. The smell of the soup filled the room again, stronger now. He picked up a bowl, poured the soup into it, and placed it where she could see. Then he stepped back, folding his arms across his chest, silent as stone. Her hands curled at her sides. No one had offered her food since her husband's death. No one had cared whether she lived or starved. And now, a human, an enemy, was giving her more than she dared dream. She moved slowly, her legs weak, and sat on the edge of the chair opposite him. The wood groaned under her weight, but she did not care. She lifted the bowl with shaking fingers and sipped. The hot liquid slid down her throat, burning, but the warmth spread through her body like fire against ice. She sipped again, her eyes closing. Tears rolled down her face, but she kept drinking until the bowl was empty. She looked up. The man had not moved. He leaned slightly on his chair, arms still crossed, his eyes fixed on her. She could not read him. Was he angry? Curious? Pitying? She wiped her face with her sleeve and lowered her gaze. Shame filled her chest. She was nothing but a starving thief in his home. She waited for him to speak at last, to ask for payment, to demand something she could not give. But the words never came. His silence was louder than shouting, heavier than any weapon. She almost wished he would curse her, because the quiet pressed on her heart harder than steel. Her body relaxed against the chair, weak but less desperate now. For the first time in weeks she felt full, but her mind raced with fear. Why had he not punished her? Why had he not driven her out? Did he want something else? She glanced at him quickly, her chest tightening. His face was tired, lined with shadows, But there was no cruelty there, only something she did not understand. She lowered her head again, whispering words too quiet for him to hear. A thank you meant more for herself than for him. The man reached out once more, pulling another piece of bread from the loaf. He placed it beside her empty bowl, not close enough to touch her, but close enough for her to take. His eyes finally shifted away, turning to the window where the night pressed against the glass. For the first time, she felt the weight of his choice. He had seen her, an alien, a widow, a thief in his kitchen, and he had not raised an alarm. Instead, he had given her food, simple and warm, without asking a single question. Her heart pounded with confusion. She wanted to flee, but her body told her to stay. The silence stretched again, but now it was different. Not sharp, not full of terror. It was heavy still, but with something new, something she could not name. She stared at the bread beside her bowl, her hands twitching, torn between fear and hunger again. But when she finally reached for it, slower this time, the man did not look back at her. He let her eat in peace. And for the first time since she lost everything, she felt that maybe she was not as alone in the world as she had believed. The bowl in her hands felt heavy, but she did not let it go. Her fingers wrapped tight around the edges as if someone might snatch it away at any moment. She lifted it again and drank slowly this time. The soup warmed her stomach, spreading like fire through her chest, down to her toes. Every swallow felt like life returning to her veins. She had been empty for so long that the sudden fullness almost hurt. Yet she could not stop. Her lips trembled with every sip, and tears slid down her cheeks, falling into the bowl, mixing with the soup. She tried to wipe her face with the back of her sleeve, ashamed that she was crying in front of him, but the tears would not stop. They came from deeper than hunger, from a pain she had carried too long. The taste of warm broth reminded her of nights long ago when her husband had returned home from patrol and she had cooked for him. She remembered the way he would laugh, telling her the food was terrible, but still eating it all with a grin. He had promised to come back from the war. He had promised they would build a family together. But the war took him, and all she had left was silence, hunger, and shame. Her body leaned forward as she ate, as if the food itself might vanish if she moved too slow. She tore at the bread the man had placed near her bowl, dipping it into the broth, chewing fast, swallowing with desperation. She ate as though every bite was her last. Her hands shook so badly she spilled drops on the table, but she did not dare look up. She could feel his eyes on her, steady, unblinking, watching every move. She thought he must see her as nothing but an animal, broken and wild. The shame cut at her chest, yet her hunger forced her to keep going. The man made no sound. He did not speak or scold her. He only leaned back in his chair, arms still crossed, his eyes unreadable. She wanted him to say something, anything, even if it was cruel, because the silence tore at her nerves. But he did not. The only sounds in the room were her hurried chewing and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. She slowed at last when her stomach could hold no more. The bowl was empty, and crumbs of bread clung to her fingers. She licked them quickly, ashamed of her own hunger, then set the bowl back on the table with shaking hands. Her breath came heavy, her chest rising and falling as if she had run a long distance. She looked down at her lap, refusing to meet his eyes. Her thoughts drifted again to her child. She remembered holding the tiny body, too weak to cry, too light to live. She had sung lullabies while hiding tears, pretending everything would be fine, but the child had slipped away in her arms. She pressed her palms hard against her thighs, trying to push the memory away, but the pain only grew. She whispered under her breath, words in her own tongue, prayers for the dead. The sound was soft, broken, almost too low to hear. The man shifted slightly in his chair, and she flinched, pulling her shoulders tight as if to shield herself. He had not moved closer. He only leaned forward, resting one hand flat on the table. She finally looked up, her eyes red, her lips trembling. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something in his gaze. Not anger, not hatred, but a kind of heavy understanding. He had not asked for her story, yet somehow she felt he already knew it. Her throat tightened, and the words spilled out before she could stop them. She told him in broken human tongue about her husband, about the war, about the soldiers who left her with nothing. She spoke of the hunger, the nights in the cold, the child who never woke. The words shook as they left her mouth, like glass ready to break. She had never told anyone before. Her people had turned their faces away, pretending she did not exist. And here she was, speaking her deepest pain to a human stranger. The man did not interrupt. He did not look away. He listened, his face still, but his eyes fixed on her as if her words mattered. When she finished, her voice cracked and died, leaving only silence again. She pressed her hands to her face, ashamed that she had shared too much, ashamed of her weakness. Her shoulders shook as she tried to quiet her sobs, but they slipped out in short, sharp breaths. He stood then, his chair scraping softly against the floor. She gasped and pushed back, expecting at last the strike, the harsh command, the punishment for trespassing. But he walked to the stove, lifted the pot again, and poured more soup into her bowl. He set it down before her, his movements steady, careful. He said nothing, and then he stepped back to his chair. She stared at the bowl, her tears dripping into it, making ripples on the surface. Her heart pounded with confusion. She could not understand him. Humans were supposed to be cruel, full of hate for her kind. Yet here he was, giving her more food, listening to her grief, offering her a silence that was not harsh but strangely gentle. Her fingers curled around the bowl again. She did not drink this time right away. She lifted her head, meeting his eyes with her own. For the first time since entering the kitchen, she did not see him as an enemy. She saw him as something else, something she could not yet name. The clock ticked. The fire in the stove crackled softly. And in that quiet moment, with a full stomach and tears still wet on her cheeks, she realized she was not as invisible as she thought. Someone had seen her, heard her, and chosen not to turn away. Her voice was weak at first, as if her throat had forgotten how to form words. She kept her eyes low, fixed on the table, but the silence between them forced the truth out of her. She spoke slowly, her accent thick, the human words heavy on her tongue. She told him about the war. Her husband had gone to fight, called by her people to defend their honor against humans. He never came back. The army returned with broken weapons and empty eyes, but not with him. She had waited, clinging to hope, until hope itself turned to dust. Her voice cracked when she spoke of the day she found his name among the dead. She remembered how the elders turned their faces away, offering no comfort. A widow was a burden in her society, a shadow no one wanted near. She spoke of being pushed aside, treated as if she no longer belonged. Her people had left her to starve, whispering that she was cursed. Even the small home she had once shared with her husband was taken, given to others as if her grief meant nothing. The human listened without speaking, his face still, his hands resting on the table. She dared not look at him, but she could feel his eyes on her. The words spilled faster now, breaking through the dam she had held for too long. She confessed that she had wandered the streets, begging for scraps, only to be shoved away. She confessed she had watched her child weaken, too frail to survive without food, until one morning the little one stopped breathing altogether. Her lips trembled as she said it, her hands clutching at her chest as if to tear the pain out. The kitchen felt too small for her sorrow. Her body shook with sobs, and the tears ran down her face unchecked. She covered her eyes with both hands, ashamed to show such weakness, yet unable to stop. She spoke of the long nights that followed, of hiding in ruins, of eating dirt and weeds, of losing the will to live. The war had not only taken her husband and her child, it had taken her place in the world. She was nothing, no one. That was why she had broken into this house. She was not a thief by choice, only by desperation. When her voice fell into silence, she dared to look at him. His expression had not changed much, but his eyes held something she did not understand. It was not pity, not exactly. It was something heavier, something that seemed to press on him as much as her story pressed on her. For the first time, she wondered what the war had taken from him too. Did he have names he remembered, faces he would never see again? Did he carry ghosts on his back the way she carried hers? Her breath slowed, and she realized the room had grown painfully quiet. She expected anger to come next, maybe scorn. He had listened. Yes, but surely he would remind her she was his enemy. Surely he would throw her out or worse. Her people had always said humans had no mercy. She braced herself for his judgment. But the man did not shout. He did not curse her. He did not tell her to leave. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath, as if he too carried a weight too heavy to name. His eyes dropped to the table, then rose to her again, steady and clear. He did not speak words of comfort, but his silence itself felt like a strange kind of answer. He was not pushing her away. He was not turning his back. He was still here. The woman's chest tightened with confusion. She could not understand why. She had confessed everything, her shame, her weakness, her crimes. She had admitted to sneaking into his home, stealing his food, and pouring out her broken story. Yet he stayed calm, listening as if every word mattered. No one in her life had listened before. Her own people had abandoned her, but this man, this human, gave her what they never had: space to speak, space to be heard. Her hands trembled on her lap. She lowered her head again, whispering, "Why?" The single word slipped out before she could stop it. Why had he not thrown her out? Why had he not punished her? Why had he given her food? Her voice broke, and her tears blurred the sight of him. She whispered again, "Why?" The man did not answer at once. He stood, moving slowly, and she flinched as he walked past her. But he did not reach for a weapon. He walked to the stove, where the pot still rested, and stirred it with the ladle. He poured more soup into a bowl, set it on the table, and placed another piece of bread beside it. He pushed it closer to her, just as he had before. Then he sat down again, silent, his face calm but firm. The woman stared at the food, her heart twisting. It was not just the food he offered, it was something deeper, something she had been denied for too long. Dignity. A chance to be seen not as an enemy, not as a burden, but as a living soul. She could not bring herself to thank him aloud. The words stuck in her throat, heavy with pride and fear. But her tears spoke for her, sliding down her face as she lifted the bowl once more. She drank slowly this time, not like a starving thief, but like someone trying to hold on to a fragile gift. The warmth filled her again, easing the ache in her chest. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, if soldiers would come, if this man would change his mind. But in this moment, with the fire's glow touching the walls and the human sitting across from her in silence, she felt something she thought she would never feel again. She felt alive. She looked at him one last time, her eyes red but steady. "I am alone," she whispered, her voice rough but clear. "But you did not turn away." The man gave no reply. Yet something in his stillness told her he had heard, and that was enough. For the first time since the war began, she no longer felt invisible. The days passed slowly, and the woman stayed hidden in the human's farmhouse. She never left the walls of the kitchen and the barn, too afraid to be seen. But the outside world did not stay quiet. Rumors began to spread in the nearby village. Someone had seen a shadow moving near the farm at night. Someone else claimed they saw strange footprints in the dirt that did not belong to any human. Whispers grew, and whispers turned into suspicion. Soon soldiers were walking the roads, their boots heavy, their rifles always ready. The man noticed first. He had gone into the town to trade supplies, and when he returned, his face was darker, his jaw tight. He said nothing at first, but when he saw her crouched in the barn, trembling with hunger again, he told her plainly, "They are searching." His voice was low, but the warning was clear. She froze, her stomach twisting in fear. If they found her here, they would not only take her away, they would punish him too. That night, she lay on the hay, her eyes wide open, staring at the roof of the barn. Every creak of wood sounded like footsteps. Every bark of a dog in the distance made her heart race. She pulled her thin blanket around her shoulders, but no warmth came. She thought about leaving before dawn, slipping into the forest where the soldiers might not find her. She would starve, maybe die, but at least the man would be safe. Yet the thought of stepping out into the cold night air alone filled her with dread. The next morning, she heard the sound of horses outside. Soldiers were near. She rushed to the corner of the barn and crouched low, pressing her body against the rough boards. Her hands shook so badly she had to cover her mouth to keep from making a sound. The voices of men grew louder, rough and sharp, asking questions. "Anyone seen an alien woman? She's dangerous." Their boots crunched on the gravel road. The barn door creaked, and she held her breath. But instead of soldiers, it was the man. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning quickly before landing on her. He whispered, "Stay quiet." She nodded, too terrified to speak. He closed the door behind him, leaving her in the shadows, and went back to the house. She listened from the dark, her ears twitching, picking up the sound of voices. Soldiers were at his door now. They asked questions, harsh and quick. Had he seen anyone strange? Had he noticed tracks near his land? Did he know if any alien refugees were hiding nearby? She pressed her hands together, shaking, certain he would hand her over. If he did, no one would blame him. Protecting her was too dangerous. But then she heard his voice, calm, firm, steady. No, I haven't seen anything. The soldiers did not believe so easily. They searched around the farmhouse, their boots stomping against the wooden floor. One of them even stepped into the barn, shining a lantern across the hay. She crouched lower, holding her breath until her chest ached. The light passed over her hiding place, but did not stop. The soldier muttered and left. She waited, every second stretched into forever, until at last the sound of boots faded away. The horses clopped against the road, and silence returned. She stayed frozen for a long time, afraid it was a trick, until the barn door opened again. The man walked in, his face tight with tension, but his eyes softened when they met hers. She collapsed then, her body shaking from the fear she had held inside. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she whispered, "They will kill me. And you too." Her voice broke with guilt. "I should not stay. You are in danger because of me." She tried to stand, but her knees were too weak. She wanted to leave, to run, but her legs would not carry her. The man crouched down in front of her. His eyes were serious, but there was no anger. "If you go out there, you will not survive," he said firmly. His words carried weight, a certainty she could not deny. He placed a rough hand on her shoulder, steady and strong. "Here, at least, you have a chance." Her heart pounded. She had expected rejection, punishment, maybe even betrayal. Instead, he was choosing to protect her, even when it meant danger for himself. The realization hit her harder than hunger ever had. Why? Why would he risk so much for her? A stranger, an alien, a widow with nothing to give. She could not understand. The fear outside did not vanish. Soldiers continued to patrol in the days that followed. Their voices carried on the wind, their dogs barked in the night, and every sound made her jump. But inside the farmhouse, a fragile safety held. She began to notice how carefully the man watched the road from his window, how he moved supplies quietly, so no one would suspect another mouth was being fed. He worked harder in the fields, covering for the food she ate. But he never complained. She tried to help in small ways. She cleaned the kitchen when he was gone, swept the barn floor, fetched water from the well at night when no one could see her. It was little, almost nothing, but it was her way of showing she was not just a burden. She wanted him to know she cared, even if she could never repay what he had already done. One evening, as she scrubbed the wooden table with a rag, she heard his voice behind her. "You don't have to do that." She turned, startled, and saw him standing in the doorway, his face calm, but his eyes softer than before. She lowered her gaze, her cheeks warming. "I want to," she said quietly. He nodded once and said nothing more. But in that moment, she realized something had changed between them. He was no longer just a man who had caught her in his kitchen. He was her protector. And though she had not asked for it, though she did not understand why, she felt safer with him than she had felt since before the war. The world outside grew more dangerous every day, but inside the farmhouse, a fragile bond was being built. It was unspoken, delicate, and full of risk. Yet it gave her a strength she thought she had lost forever. Nights in the farmhouse were quiet, but the quiet was not peace. She lay awake most nights in the barn, staring at the beams above her, listening to every creak of wood, every shift of wind. Fear sat heavy on her chest. She knew the soldiers were still looking. Any day, any hour, they could knock on the door again, and this time they might search deeper. She thought often about leaving, slipping away in the dark, disappearing into the forest, where at least the man would no longer risk his life for her. One evening, she gathered her courage. He was sitting at the kitchen table, mending a broken tool with slow, careful hands. She stood near the doorway, her shadow trembling on the floor. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "I should go," she whispered. "If I stay, they will find me. You will suffer." Her words shook like leaves in the wind. The man did not look up right away. He finished tying the cord, set the tool aside, and only then lifted his gaze to her. His eyes were steady, calm, but there was something harder in them now, like steel under the surface. "If you go out there," he said plainly, "you won't last the night." She flinched. His words cut like truth, heavy and unshakable. She shook her head, clutching her thin shawl around her shoulders. "Better me than you," she murmured. "They will not stop. If they catch you hiding me, they will kill you too." Her voice broke at the end. She meant every word. Guilt had grown inside her like a stone. The man stood then, the chair scraping back. He walked toward her slowly, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. She pressed herself against the doorframe, bracing for anger, for rejection. But he stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the lines of tiredness carved into his face. His voice was low but firm. "If you walk out that door, you will die. I don't want your death on my conscience. Stay." Her heart pounded. The final word hit harder than any shout. Stay. He was not asking. He was choosing for her, and she did not know how to answer. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her chest tightened as tears filled her eyes again. She turned her face away, ashamed of her weakness. The man sighed, rubbing a hand over his rough jaw. "You think I do this for nothing?" he asked quietly. She blinked, startled, and looked back at him. His eyes were tired, but not cruel. "I lost people too," he said, his voice softer now. "I know what it means to be left with nothing." His words carried the weight of truth, and she felt it settle deep inside her. The silence stretched. She lowered her head, her shoulders shaking. For the first time, she realized that the bond between them was not just mercy. It was recognition. Two broken souls, bound by loss, finding each other in the ruins of war. From that day, she stopped talking about leaving. Instead, she tried harder to help him in the small ways she could. She gathered wood from the barn, carried water from the well at night when the soldiers would not see. She mended torn clothes with her clumsy hands, even though human tools were strange to her. He never asked her to do these things, but he never stopped her either. Slowly, she began to trust him. At first, it was only in tiny moments, meeting his eyes when he spoke, letting her hands rest on the table instead of hiding them in her lap, standing a little closer when they worked in the fields. Each time, her fear still whispered that he might betray her, that he might hand her over to the soldiers. But his actions never changed. He fed her, protected her, and when danger came close, he stood between her and it without hesitation. One night, as the wind howled outside and the fire burned low in the stove, she sat at the table across from him. The warmth of the soup filled the air, and the silence was not heavy this time. It was steady. She found herself watching the way his hands moved, rough and scarred, yet careful. She wondered what he had lost, who he had once cared for. She wanted to ask, but the words stayed trapped in her throat. He glanced up suddenly, catching her stare. Her cheeks flushed, and she quickly looked down at her bowl. But for the first time, she did not feel shame. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar, something she had not felt since before the war. Safety. Days turned into weeks. Outside, soldiers still searched, but inside, the farmhouse became a fragile shelter. She no longer thought of herself only as a thief hiding in the shadows. She began to feel part of the place, like her hands and breath left marks on it. She swept the floors, tended to the small garden, even laughed softly once when the man made a dry comment about the stubbornness of weeds. The sound startled her, because she had forgotten what laughter felt like. The bond between them grew, though neither spoke of it aloud. It showed in small ways. The way he left extra food on the table without a word. The way she folded his clothes carefully after washing them. The way he glanced at the window every time soldiers passed, his body tense until the danger moved on. It showed in the way she no longer hid in the barn every night, sometimes falling asleep in the chair near the fire, knowing he would not let harm touch her there. And though fear never fully left her, it began to weaken, replaced by something stronger. Trust, fragile, unsteady, but real. She had thought trust was impossible after the war, after her people abandoned her, after hunger and loss stripped her of everything. Yet here it was, built slowly in the quiet of a farmhouse kitchen, between two souls who should have been enemies. She lay awake one night, staring at the fire's glow, and whispered to herself, "I am not alone." The words felt strange, but true. And in the silence, she felt a warmth in her chest that no bowl of soup could ever give. The sound of boots on the road came first, heavy and sharp against the dirt. The woman froze where she was, a basket of wood in her arms, her heart slamming in her chest. She looked to the man, who had already moved to the window. His jaw tightened, his shoulders stiff. Soldiers. Their shadows stretched across the yard as they approached the farmhouse, rifles glinting in the late afternoon light. Her throat went dry. They had come again. This time, she knew, they would not leave so easily. The man turned quickly, his eyes locking on hers. "Go?" he said in a low voice, pointing toward the cellar door near the kitchen floor. She hesitated only a moment before dropping the wood and rushing inside. Her hands trembled as she lifted the trapdoor, the smell of earth rising from the darkness below. She climbed down, pulling it shut, just as a hard knock rattled the front door. The cellar was damp and cold, filled with shadows, and she crouched low, pressing a hand over her mouth to keep from breathing too loud. Above her, voices rang out. The soldiers demanded entry, their tone sharp and commanding. She heard the door creak open, the man's steady voice answering them. He sounded calm, but she could hear the weight in his words. They asked about refugees, about sightings, about strange movements near the farm. Her chest tightened as she listened. If he faltered even once, if he said the wrong word, they would drag her out and end everything. The boots thudded on the floor above her. They moved from room to room, opening doors, searching corners. The wood above her head groaned under their weight. She pressed herself into the dirt wall, her whole body shaking, praying they would not think to look below. The sound of metal scraped close, the barrel of a rifle knocking against furniture. One soldier muttered, "Check everywhere. She could be hiding in plain sight." Her heart pounded so hard she thought it would give her away. The footsteps came closer to the kitchen. She shut her eyes, biting her lip until blood filled her mouth. She heard the heavy tread stop above her, so close that dust shook loose from the ceiling of the cellar. The soldier's voice was rough. "What about down there?" For a breathless moment, silence followed. Then came the man's voice, calm but firm. "Rats and mold, nothing else." The soldier grunted, clearly unsatisfied. But after a long pause, his steps moved away. Relief washed over her, but it was thin, fragile. She did not dare move. Minutes passed like hours until finally the sound of boots retreated. Orders were barked outside, and then horses clattered against the ground. She strained her ears, waiting until the last sound of them faded down the road. Only then did the trapdoor creak open. Light spilled into the cellar, and she looked up to see the man's face, pale but steady. He reached down and pulled her out with both hands, his grip firm, grounding her as she stumbled. Her knees gave way, and she clutched at his arm, trembling. Tears streamed down her face, hot and unstoppable. "You lied for me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You risked everything." Her words came out choked, full of guilt and disbelief. He steadied her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. His eyes were tired, but there was no regret in them. "I chose," he said simply. She stared at him, unable to speak. His choice had been clear. He could have given her up, saved himself, and no one would have blamed him. Instead, he had stood between her and death, offering no excuses, no hesitation. That single act was more than mercy. It was a bond forged in danger, stronger than anything she had known. Later that night, when the soldiers were long gone and the farmhouse lay quiet again, she sat at the table, her hands still shaking. The man placed food before her as always, bread, soup, a small cup of water. She stared at it, tears welling again, and whispered, "Why do you do this?" Her voice was soft, trembling. He did not answer with long speeches. He only met her gaze and said, "Because I could not watch you die." His words were simple, but they struck deeper than anything else. She lowered her head, clutching the bread with both hands as if it were the only solid thing in the world. She ate slowly this time, not like a thief, not like a desperate beggar, but like someone who had been given permission to live. Each bite felt like a gift she could never repay. When the meal was done, she looked at him again, her eyes red but shining with something new. "You fed me when no one else would. You saved me," she whispered. Her words trembled, but they were honest. He said nothing, only gave a small nod, but that silence spoke louder than words. She felt it settle inside her, warm and steady. She was no longer invisible, no longer unwanted. Someone had chosen to see her, to protect her, even at the risk of his own life. That night, she did not return to the barn. She sat near the fire instead, her head resting against the chair, her body finally relaxing. The man worked quietly beside her, mending a net, his movements slow and steady. The fire crackled, casting soft light across the room. For the first time in years, she felt something like peace. She knew the danger was not gone. The soldiers would return. The world outside was still harsh, cruel, unforgiving. But inside this farmhouse, a bond had been forged that no threat could easily break. She was no longer just a starving widow, no longer just an alien hiding in fear. She was someone the man had chosen to save, and that choice had changed everything. As the flames burned low, she whispered softly, almost to herself, "I am alive because of you." The words floated in the warm air, fragile but true. The man did not reply, but when she looked at him, she saw the faintest trace of a smile, quiet and real. It was enough. In that moment, their bond was sealed, not just of survival, but of hope reborn between two broken souls.